Hi, lovely ladies. How are you all doing today?
Good thing.
Hey, very good. Thank you
Jill,
for
how's
having
lockdown
us.
treating you? Oh, no, thank you for being a part of this. Jill, how's lockdown treating you? Mentally, spiritually,
Lockdown,
emotionally?
lockdown has been good for me, if I can say it that way. I mean, I feel like some of my mental health did take like a bit of a toll because you're completely faced with this and you don't know what the future holds. So there are some days where it gets literally too much. But I mean, like out of all the days, I feel like most of the days were good days.
Yeah. And how about you, Jenny? How are you coping with everything that's going on?
I feel like you have your moments where you're really down and you're really depressed, and I think it's more of the uncertainty that gets you down.
Yeah.
But the lockdowns also taught me to take every day as it comes and focus on today and making this day as meaningful as possible. So I mean that's the plus side of the lockdown, but it's been tough.
Yeah, 100%. And Peru, what do you think about like lockdown in general, and not just lockdown, but like all the other social issues that we're seeing because of it?
Mm.
Um, I'm sort of like in the middle, like I'm on the fence about it because I mean, I don't value human life over money, but at some point, money is human life as well because
Mm,
people
That's
starve
true.
and if they aren't making an income. At the same time, if we go back into like level five, there are people going to lose businesses and stuff like that. But then if you open up the economy, people will just go wild and the death rate will soar. So I'm, yeah, I don't actually know what the actual solution is.
exactly. And I think that's what's so interesting about lockdown is it's kind of exposed like many of our socioeconomic issues that we really haven't addressed that are tied to capitalism, I feel very strongly.
Yeah.
And, like you, I don't necessarily disagree with the capitalist system, but, given the economic impact of the lockdown on especially the most vulnerable people,
Yeah.
you can see that there are flaws in the system, that a lot of people aren't able to access healthcare. A lot of people are just not able to, survive in a
But it's
lockdown.
because the
Just,
majority of the wealth is like in so like few people. Like
yeah,
if they were to, share a little, it would go a long way. And it's not like saying you're gonna have to drastically change your lifestyle or anything like that, because like 2% of the population are like the billionaires.
but you're speaking of just like, sharing wealth in general. And I think what lockdown has also sort of exposed is not just, disparities in, you know, like just wealth in general, but also just on racial lines too. I think it just across the world, I think it's quite blatantly obvious to see that the majority of people who are bearing the brunt of this are women, and also people of color in particular. Also are really kind of suffering quite a lot because of the lockdown, and not just because of the burden on the healthcare system, but just like just their livelihoods in general. Yeah, people are very, very angry. And I think people are also just in general like quite fed up. I'm sure that you've seen it too, Danny and Joe. Like people are just generally at this point in time just fed up. And I think a lot of people just kind of feel like, okay, well, why do some people want to say so much? Why do people want to talk so much? But it's also because of that frustration. People are tired of struggling all the time. People are tired of being discriminated against on the basis of their race. But it still makes people uncomfortable to talk about race. And I often wonder why that is the case, though. Like, Jill, why do you think people just struggle so much to talk about race and racial discrimination?
I feel like when the reason why people struggle, I'm going to say it like this because it's not everybody, people struggle to talk about race, is the fact is there's so much truth in it and people hate hearing the truth. People don't want to hear it, or they don't want to admit that somebody else might also be victimized. Somebody else might have went through all that. Even though, yes, it's many years ago, but for some odd reason, what happened many years ago, it's still so effective today. And that's what people don't want to hear. They kind of just want to brush it off and move on. And there are just some things that you just cannot brush off and move on, especially if it's on a daily basis that you face it. So for me, it really, I feel like people don't want to speak about race because if they do, they have to admit things to themselves.
Yeah, it's very difficult to kind of look in the mirror and just realize that maybe you are part of the problem. I don't
Exactly.
know. Danny, what are your thoughts? Like, do you feel like white people in particular have a big problem talking about race, or do you think that's just like just a myth? What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely. I feel, for a lot of white people, they don't like confrontation. So everything just gets brushed under the rug, and let's not talk about it. Let's not deal with it. Let's just be happy. And why do you want to talk about things like this? It doesn't make any sense. And also, I feel that white people feel uncomfortable talking about race because they always feel they're the victim, in a sense that when we're talking about race, it's always the white person has done something wrong. So let's not talk about it because someone's going to say, look at the white person again doing something wrong. So let's just not talk about it. Let's just be happy. And why talk about conversation that's going to ruin the vibe, going to ruin our day?
Yeah.
Let's talk about right things. How are you? How's the weather? Instead of going more deep, because as Jill said, it resonates something in your heart and it makes you feel uncomfortable. So you'd rather not go there.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard like quite a few people kind of use that phrasing, like, why do you want to talk about this stuff? Like, things are okay. I mean, you're not suffering as a black person. Like, I mean, maybe I'm not, like suffering like in the way that you would maybe like to see, like manifest, but I have been deeply affected by racism. I have been deeply affected by racial discrimination. So yeah, it's very weird to me that people do say that. But again, it's like you say very rightly, it's uncomfortable. You don't want to sort of admit to yourself that maybe you are part of a bigger system that has caused people for generations to be stuck in a cycle of poverty.
Yeah.
What do you think, Peru?
When I'm with my family, it is, it's one of those things I like to talk about it because it's something that has affected me. And my parents, they lived through apartheid. But they don't like to necessarily speak about it. My mom in particular, she's very, set in her ways. Whereas like with my friends, who majority of my friends happen to be white, it is an uncomfortable thing to bring up. Like, I mean, I once went to a 30th where I was the only person of color there and nobody noticed. It wasn't a thing for anybody else, but I looked around the room and just saw white people and I knew I was different. And imagine having to bring up the topic of racism or race in a situation like that. Yeah, like, and I'm not, the thing is, it's like, you're never blaming the person. You're never blaming the person you're talking to. It's the system. And I think that's where things get lost. Because, people will generalize and they'll say white people or Indian people or black people. And it's not everybody. But the problem is that you can't say not all white people. It's the same as saying not all men, because you're giving people leeway to not examine their own behavior and how they may be contributing to, like, upholding the racist society in which we live.
Yeah. And you touched on a very interesting point as well, that I think for people of color in particular, sometimes you don't really want to talk about race because you don't want to be that black person or that Indian person or, whatever particular, race that you are. You don't want to be that person that kind of, like people say, well, always brings up the issue, like, or is always talking about those sorts of things, which can also, in a way, silence you and muzzle you and prevent you from actually talking about these things. Jill, have you ever experienced that before? Like, do you feel like that's a real thing that black people maybe go through?
So I'm like kind of in the same boat like Peru. Like, majority of my friends are white, and when it comes to speaking about race, some of them you can speak about race and then you can have a civil conversation, where some, as soon as you bring up the race, it's like, oh, but why is it always, let's say, a certain race? Why is it always white people? Like, we are just having a good time and now you're going to bring this up. And it's not about to be like offensive to anybody. It's about having to be able to speak to your friends about it because they're your friends. You want to be able to be like, you know what, as my friends, this is how I feel. How do you guys feel? Because I do feel like it's also not color on color, but it happens in our own communities too, where Black people are racist against Black people. It happens. And to tell the truth, I feel like we still have a long way to go, but it starts with us. For me, it's comfortable to speak about it because I've also owned who I am. I am not speaking from things that I read. I'm speaking out of my own experience. Where some people, when they want to speak about it, sometimes they don't even know how to approach it. And I feel like that's also why sometimes it's so difficult to speak about race with your friends, because they don't know how to approach it without being offensive. And I feel like it shouldn't be like that. If you have something on your heart to say it. As friends, we are in a safe place. Say it, and then we can talk about it. I mean, like right now, we are friends, different races, but we are able to sit down and have a civilized conversation about race and pressing issues without offending each other.
Yeah, 100%.
So true.
Danny, what's been your experience?
I feel that also because so many people have, in a great world, it would be great if race wasn't an issue, right? But at the moment, we have so many different opinions on different races, and everyone has their own personal opinion on if they even are racist or not a racist, or equality, or how certain races should be treated. That when you try and discuss something with someone who might have a different opinion to you, but you don't know how to discuss it, it's rather let's not talk about it, because you don't want to be in a place where you're with people that you feel uncomfortable. It's the same as when discussing religion. If you're not with people who you can actually discuss something with, you'd rather just let's not talk about it, because it's going to end up in an argument. So I think it's also, teaching people certain ways or how you can discuss race or religion without it having to be an argument. And that goes back to allowing yourself to be able to understand someone's point of view, not always being right. You need to really understand that there could be a chance that you're not right, and allow other people to have their say without being rude. And I think because that fundamental thing hasn't happened in conversations, it's rather let's not talk about it, because we're not about to have an uncomfortable and awkward, horrible time, whether it's at a braai, a party, a picnic, a phone call. Let's rather not talk about it. It comes back to let's just talk about fun things that don't roll up emotions, because people don't know, they haven't learned how to discuss it without offending each other.
But the thing
and
is,
I feel like people sometimes also don't know how to approach it.
But every now and then, in some kind of random way, someone will slip in something vaguely racist or subtly racist. And then you have to deal with that, because what I've done most of the time in those kind of situations is laugh because everyone else is laughing, or just brush it off. And I've realized that I need to, that my silence is violence. Like, I'm just contributing to what is, perpetuating the cycle. And if I don't call out people on the spot, then they don't know. Then I can't be like next week, but remember last week you said this, and they're going to be like, it's like puppy training a dog to not pee inside. Like, you have to tell them right then and there to not do that. As weird of an analogy as that was.
I understand where that comes from, though, because for me, growing up, there are a lot of things that was said to me, but I never understood that it was racist until I was older. So then there's that part where you can sit in a conversation, comments will be made, but because you don't know, you don't, it doesn't register that, oh, that's racist. Only years after that, it's racist. Like, I'll be like, oh, that was actually racist. And that is why I am so pushing from now on forward to be like, okay, when you do say something, I will stand up for myself, because now I know. Back then, I didn't know.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then
I
on the
also
topic
feel
of,
as
sorry,
a
Debbie.
woman, when,
Yeah.
you know, just touching back on what Parishka said, because I do the same thing. Also with gender-based violence, or when a man is being inappropriate with women or with yourself, you're just like, okay, anyway, let's change the subject, because you don't know how to deal with it. And the same with people who say racial comments. You laugh because you're uncomfortable, allows them to think, okay, it's okay. But we need to get to a point where we say, sorry, that was actually a really rude comment. Like I didn't, that comment, whether it is a racial comment to my race or someone else, just be able to be like, sorry, like not even being rude, but just be like, hi, like that comment was actually not cool. Like it's very offensive.
The best way
Please
to deal
just
with that sort of thing, and what I've read, is even with sexist jokes. So a man makes a sexist joke, or someone has a racist joke or whatever, the best thing to do is, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And then when they have to try and explain it, they realize how ridiculous it is.
That's quite clever.
So, and
interesting take on it.
They call themselves out on it, because I've heard some really interesting sexist, like rape jokes and stuff. And then you're like, but I don't understand. Trying to explain a rape joke to someone, they realize how just unfunny it is.